with this segment on whistleblowers, we are going to focus on why blow the whistle. The next two segments are going to be to walk the viewer through how the Whistleblower Act works, the FCA, and then thirdly, just the individual claims and the steps along the way under the FCA and how those claims are litigated. It's the most important piece under the FCA of bringing a whistleblower claim is to make sure you choose the right law firm. And at Levin, Papantonio, as I've mentioned before, we've put together a team of lawyers, James Kaufman and Chris Paulo's here, two of them, with different specialties or different areas to focus on this whistleblower key TAM work. But the most important piece is the why blow the whistle. And Chris, can you give a couple of examples? Or let's just start with an example of an instance here just along the Gulf Coast of when or why a whistleblower would have been very important in the last couple of years.
Certainly, Paul. Peter, in hindsight, when looking at some tragedies or examples of situations that have arisen where had a whistleblower stepped forward, it could have certainly have been prevented. A great example that I think hits home here in the Gulf Coast is that of the BP oil spill. Had there been a whistleblower that had bravely stepped forward and commented or blown the whistle with regard to how the blowout preventer had been tested, inspected, used, what the safety on that particular platform was like, that it's very likely that tragedy, that enormous loss of life and that massive and horrible impact to our ecosystem and our state and the states around us could very likely have been prevented had someone stepped forward and put people on notice of that particular issue. So whistleblowing has been incredibly effective over the period and the life of the Federal False Claims Act in preventing serious tragedies and corporate crime. There is an accounting firm, a very well-known and well-respected accounting firm called PricewaterhouseCoopers that has routinely audited corporate culture throughout the globe. And in fact, they have undertaken a study that's considered the most comprehensive study in corporate fraud that's ever been conducted. They interviewed 5,400 chief executive officers, chief financial officers, and corporate compliance officers. And across all industries and across all boards, each one of those individuals said that the single best way to prevent corporate wrongdoing and corporate fraud against the government was through tips and whistleblowing.
Now, if you're a whistleblower and you have information that we're overcharging the government and we are spending too much money on specific services and the biller is actually lying about those, what happens to the whistleblower? What compensation is there in it for the whistleblower? Why should a whistleblower be motivated to report fraud, Chris?
Well, there are rewards and bounty systems in place. There are a myriad of laws that allow a whistleblower to bring the claim, whether it's through IRS laws, whether it's through the Federal False Claims Law or the key TAM law that we've been discussing, or another law called Dodd-Frank, or even some smaller whistleblower laws through OSHA and even state-based laws. So there's a ton of laws that are designed to encourage this type of fraud prevention by protecting whistleblowers. And when I say protecting, they have certain provisions that are anti-retaliation provisions that allow for back pay, reinstatement of your job, that will prevent the corporation or the company that you work for and upon which you're blowing the whistle from retaliating against you and for being honest and moral. And then there's these bounty programs which allow the whistleblower, if they provide information that leads to the recovery of funds that have been wrongly dispersed due to fraud, they get a certain percentage of that. And the laws vary depending on how much the whistleblower will get. But for example, under the Federal False Claims Act, they can get anywhere between 15 and 30% depending on the behavior of the whistleblower and the information that they possess.
All right, now one of those whistleblower statutes, as you mentioned, Chris, was the IRS. Now, James, are you familiar with the UBS case? That
yes. Yeah.
Explain to our viewers how that worked as far as what type of recovery the whistleblower got for blowing the whistle on the UBS tax fraud.
Sure. The UBS tax fraud was uncovered by a whistleblower that was actually an employee of UBS, and he was internal to that, and he had taxes of his own that he hadn't paid, and there were some issues with foreign accountability of tax. And what that means is basically when there's money in a foreign account, you're supposed to pay tax on it if it earns income. And UBS wasn't doing it, and this individual wasn't doing it as well. But he blew the whistle on this. He saw that there was a problem with UBS and the way that they were paying taxes. He blew the whistle. UBS was hit with a fine, which I believe was several $billion, and his portion of that was $130 million. He did.
So the whistleblower collected himself $130 million or somewhere around there for blowing the whistle on the corporate fraud?
Absolutely. That was his reward for his part in uncovering UBS's failure to pay taxes. And it's part of the recovery, because if the government recovers several $billion, it is, as Chris said, 15 to 30% of that. And for him, it was about $130 million.
And every headline in the paper today is, the fiscal cliff, where we're short on taxes, too much spending, too high tax rates. We're all being forced to carry a higher and higher load of all of the services our government performs for us. But here we have people that aren't paying their taxes, in the example James just gave, or overbilling the federal government. Now, Chris, you mentioned earlier the Price Waterhouse study. How much more effective is whistleblowing on saving and recouping the fraud perpetrated on the government, other than other types of investigations by regulators or so forth? Do you have any information on that?
Well, yeah, there's an association out there called the Association of Certified Fraud Investigators. And in 2010, they released a statement that said that when compared to your police agencies or your FBIs and your state and local agencies that are charged with enforcing fraud or preventing fraud, whistleblowing or inside tips is 3 times more effective than all of those agencies combined when preventing and stopping fraud. So I think one of the purposes that we have these bounty programs, that you see insiders, whistleblowers getting these $100 million rewards, is that they are so effective and crucial, particularly because they offset the cost of all of the resources it would take simply to uncover those frauds. And the government, in their appreciation, has set aside these certain portions or these benchmarks for rewards for whistleblowers, because they do believe and have acknowledged how very, very important they are.
So in this first segment of Why Blow the Whistle, it's crystal clear that the whistleblowers are the most effective means of uncovering and rooting out fraud of individuals or companies that are taking advantage of the federal government, quite frankly, us as taxpayers. Whistleblowers are most important because it's the most efficient and most productive way of uncovering fraud. But secondly, for those individuals that do, and quite frankly, probably most importantly, that do have the courage to report the fraud and seek a claim on behalf of the taxpayers, and remember, qui tam, on behalf of the king, which means you're defrauding the country, you're defrauding the government, and the FCA Act makes it very, very, very lucrative for recovering on behalf of the federal government. And the federal government is willing, through these acts, to share in the recovery with the whistleblower. And it can be 15, 20% plus how much money goes in the whistleblower's pocket. So as you see overbilling, fraudulent billing for services not rendered, here on the Gulf Coast, some of the claims that we see is that say body armor that's sold to our servicemen, that they know doesn't work, they sell it anyway, and they overcharge it, putting our veterans in harm's way. The Whistleblower Act is a means to not only expose that fraud, protect our servicemen, but also to collect in the recovery that the federal government has fraudulently paid for services not rendered. So that's the first part of our segment of Why Blow the Whistle.